The empty jogging trail. The porch swing emitted a mournful squeal as Brody trod the flagstone path, the sound amplified by the unsettling stillness draped over Harmony Creek. Not even a chirp broke the silence. He tugged at his belt, the familiar scrape of worn leather a small comfort, and plastered on a reassuring expression as Rick Bartlett pulled open the door. Rick's eyes, bloodshot and puffy, were framed by a tangle of unkempt hair, a stark contrast to his usual polished appearance. A hastily donned navy sweater concealed a faded t-shirt. The air around him crackled with a palpable anxiety, a nervous hum that reached Brody like a discordant note. "Sheriff, thank heavens," Rick rasped, his voice catching in his throat. "I'm at a loss." He twisted his hands, knuckles gleaming bone-white. Brody entered. The house presented a picture of immaculate order, bordering on sterile. Every item occupied its designated place, a rigid tidiness at odds with the palpable distress. The faint, sharp tang of lemon polish fought a losing battle against the heavier, lingering scent of stale coffee. "Let's take it from the top." Rick, Brody soothed, his tone a calming balm. "Walk me through what happened, step by step." He indicated the living room with a gesture. "Shall we sit?" Rick nodded, leading the way to a plush, beige sofa. He perched on its edge, a coiled spring of tension. Brody settled back, striving to project tranquility, though a nameless unease stirred in his stomach. "Sarah went for her usual morning run," Rick began, his voice trembling like a leaf. "Around 6:30, she does the lake loop. Back by 7:30, 8 at the latest. But today she just vanished." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple a prominent bump in his throat. "Her phone goes straight to voicemail. I drove the route, scoured all her favorite spots, nothing. Not a trace." Brody listened intently, his gaze locked on Rick's face, registering every subtle nuance, every involuntary twitch. "The standard lake route, the jogging trail, correct?" "Yes, the main one," Rick affirmed, nodding emphatically. "The one everyone frequents." "And you covered the entire trail?" "Twice over," Rick insisted, his voice climbing in register. "I drove it twice, then walked a section." I called out her name. Utterly silent. Brody leaned forward imperceptibly. "Rick, when did you last actually lay eyes on Sarah?" Rick hesitated for a fleeting moment, a shadow of something inscrutable flickering in his gaze. "This morning, when she left for her run. I was still Abed." "Do you recall what she was wearing?" Brody inquired, maintaining a level tone. A longer pause this time. "A workout gear. Leggings, black ones. And a blue top." "Yes, a blue athletic top." Brody mentally flagged the hesitation, the lack of specifics. "Did she mention anything unusual before departing? Any concerns, appointments, anything out of the ordinary?" Rick shook his head with force. "No, nothing at all. Everything seemed routine. That's what's so unsettling. It was a typical morning. We shared coffee, she kissed me goodbye, and then gone." He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders beginning to shake. Brody remained patient, allowing the silence to amplify, letting the weight of the situation settle over Rick. "Rick," he said quietly, "I need you to think hard. Is there anything at all, you might be holding back? Anything that could possibly help us locate Sarah?" Rick looked up, his eyes brimming with desperation. "I swear, Sheriff, I'm telling you everything. I adore Sarah. I would never intentionally inflict any harm upon her." Brody met his gaze head-on, searching for the slightest indication of deception. He detected fear, without doubt, and desperation. But underneath that, a different sensation, slippery and elusive. "All right, Rick," Brody said finally, rising to his feet. "I'm going to need to conduct a sweep of the house. And subsequently, I'd like to inspect Sarah's usual running route." Rick nodded, his movements lacking energy. "By all means, Sheriff. Anything you require." As Brody moved through the residence, he absorbed every detail. The precisely positioned magazines atop the coffee table, the gleaming white kitchen, the impeccably arranged spice collection. It was a house that announced control, a meticulously crafted performance. He stepped onto the rear porch, overlooking a manicured lawn descending toward the lake's edge. The jogging trail was discernible in the distance, a slender asphalt ribbon snaking amidst the trees. A beautiful morning, the sun dancing on the water, yet Brody felt a sudden, visceral chill. They drove to the trailhead in Brody's patrol car, Rick a silent, withdrawn presence in the passenger seat. The air hung heavy with unasked questions, with the burden of Brody's growing suspicions. The jogging trail felt strangely abandoned. The crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet was the only sound to pierce the stillness. Brody surveyed the area, his gaze razor-sharp, cataloging every nuance. "Indicate where you drove, Rick," he instructed. Rick pointed to a location where the trail intersected a small service road. "I drove up to this point, then circled back, then walked this section in the direction of north." Brody followed his gesture, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Did you encounter anyone else on the trail? Any other joggers, people walking their dogs?" Rick shook his head. "Absolutely no one. It was completely deserted." Brody paused, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "That seems peculiar, Rick. On a morning like this? A Saturday, no less? This trail is usually teeming." Rick shrugged, his eyes shifting away. Perhaps everyone decided to sleep in. Brody offered no response. He continued walking, his senses on full alert. He noticed a discarded water bottle near a bench, a half-eaten apple core littering the grass. The everyday remnants of a well-used path. Yet, something still felt wrong. The air held its breath, the silence oppressive. He stopped abruptly, drawn to a small patch of disturbed earth close to the trail's edge. Subtle, easily missed, but Brody's practiced I had noticed it immediately. He knelt down, inspecting the area with care. The soil presented as darker than its surroundings, slightly damp to the touch. He reached out, testing the texture between his fingertips. "Rick," he said, his voice low and measured, "did anything strike you as odd about this particular area?" Rick approached hesitantly, his eyes widening slightly. No, I didn't see anything at all." Brody rose to his feet, his gaze holding Rick's. "I believe we need to revisit your account, Rick, because certain aspects simply aren't aligning." The sun climbed higher, etching long shadows across the forsaken trail. The silence stretched, close and stifling, broken only by the distant thrum of a lawnmower. And in that unnerving stillness, Brody sensed the truth awaited exposure. Harmony Creek searches. The call went out before noon. Sheriff Brody, his voice tight with forced optimism, addressed the growing crowd at Harmony Creek Park. The crisp morning air, smelling of damp leaves and wood smoke, did little to dispel the unease that clung to everyone present. "All right, folks," Brody said, adjusting his worn Stetson. "We appreciate you all coming out to help bring Sarah home. We're going to organize search parties to cover the jogging trails, the surrounding woods, and the creek bed. Remember, we're looking for anything unusual, a piece of clothing, a dropped item, anything that might give us a clue." He divided the volunteers into groups, assigning each a section to scour. Brody partnered himself with Deputy Miller, a young man eager to prove himself. As they walked the perimeter of the woods, Brody couldn't shake the feeling that they were going through the motions. The woods were too silent, the air too still. "Sheriff, you think?" Miller started, then trailed off, his youthful face creased with worry. Brody sighed. "I don't know what to think, Miller, but something feels off." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the fallen leaves. The sun, weak and watery, cast long, distorted shadows that danced around them. Brody stopped, pointing to a cluster of wildflowers struggling to survive in the fading light. "Sarah loved wildflowers," he said, almost to himself. "Used to plant them all over her garden." Miller nodded, his gaze sweeping over the undergrowth. They continued their search, but the earlier optimism had faded, replaced by a grim determination. Hours passed, marked only by the slow descent of the sun. Other search parties emerged from the woods, their faces etched with fatigue and disappointment. No one had found anything. Back at the park, A makeshift command center had been set up. Tables laden with sandwiches and coffee were surrounded by weary volunteers. Rick Bartlett stood apart from the crowd, his shoulders slumped, his face buried in his hands. A small group of women hovered around him, offering words of comfort. Brody watched him from a distance, his gut churning. Martha, a baker known for her cinnamon rolls, patted Rick on the arm. There, Rick. They'll find her. Sarah's a strong woman. Rick looked up, his eyes red and swollen. I don't know what I'll do without her, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Brody saw the genuine grief in Rick's face, the raw pain that seemed to radiate from him. And yet, a nagging doubt persisted. It was the meticulous nature of the man that bothered him. The perfectly manicured lawn, the spotless house, the rehearsed composure. Grief was messy, unpredictable. It didn't follow a script. As the light faded, Brody called off the search for the night. We'll start again at first light, he announced, his voice hoarse. The volunteers dispersed, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and concern. Harmony Creek, usually a haven of tranquility, was now shrouded in a blanket of fear. Brody approached Rick, who was still surrounded by sympathetic neighbors. Mr. Bartlett, he said gently, can I have a word? Rick nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. He excused himself from the group and followed Brody to his patrol car. I know this is difficult, Mr. Bartlett, Brody began, but I need to ask you a few more questions, just to clarify some details. Rick ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Of course, Sheriff. Anything. Brody leaned against the car, his gaze steady. You said Sarah always ran the same route. Yes, Sheriff. Always. Clockwise around the park, then into the woods along the creek trail. And she never deviated from that route. Rick hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowed. Not that I know of. She was a creature of habit. Brody nodded slowly. Did she ever mention seeing anything unusual on her runs? Anyone acting strangely? Rick shook his head. No, Sedif. Sarah would have told me. We told each other everything. Brody paused, choosing his next words carefully. Mr. Bartlett, is there anything you're not telling me? Anything at all, no matter how insignificant it may seem, that could help us find Sarah? Rick looked at Brody, his eyes pleading. Sheriff, I swear, I'm telling you everything I know. I just want my wife back. Brody stared at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. But Rick's face was a mask of grief and desperation. Brody sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. All right, Mr. Bartlett, he said, his voice weary. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch. Rick nodded, his shoulders slumped. He turned and walked slowly towards his car, the sympathetic gazes of his neighbors following him. Brody watched him go, his mind racing. He knew something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. But what was it? And how was he going to prove it? As Rick drove away, Brody pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Miller, he said, I need you to do something for me. Discreetly, I want you to run a background check on Rick Bartlett. Everything. And I want on my desk first thing in the morning. Whispers and doubts. Candlelight danced across Rick Bartlett's features, etching deep shadows that amplified the lines of strain around his eyes. Emily Carter, notepad in hand, stood at the periphery of Sarah's vigil, her gaze fixed on him. He was, as expected, the grieving husband, front and center. Yet an unsettling dissonance colored his display. 3 weeks had elapsed since Sarah's disappearance. 3 weeks of fruitless searches, flyers clinging to every vertical surface, and a nagging hum of unanswered questions that had unsettled the tranquility of Havenwood. Rick spoke, his voice wavering. Sarah, she was my guiding star, my all. A pause, then a sob that struck Emily as suspiciously theatrical. He surveyed the assembled townsfolk, a landscape of concerned faces mixed with the morbidly curious, and offered a weak smile. We'll find her. We have to. I ache for her. Asterisk rehearsed. Hollow. Asterisk Emily jotted down. Years of covering local tragedies for the Havenwood Herald had sharpened her instincts, allowing her to discern genuine sorrow from its counterfeit. And what she saw emanating from Rick Bartlett was decidedly counterfeit. As the crowd thinned after the vigil, Emily remained, a silent observer. Rick accepted condolences with a listless nod, a perfunctory embrace. He seemed to endure the outpouring of support rather than draw solace from it. As he turned toward his weather-beaten Ford pickup, a jarring contrast to his polished demeanor, Emily intercepted him. "Mr. Bartlett," she began, her tone gentle but resolute. "Emily Carter, Havenwood Herald. I realize this is an agonizing time, but would you be willing to answer a few questions?" His shoulders sagged. "I've already told everything to Sheriff Brody," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Understood. But perhaps you could offer some clarity for the community? Reassure them that no stone is being left unturned in the search for Sarah?" Emily offered a reassuring smile. Rick hesitated, then conceded with a sigh. "Fine, but keep it brief. I'm running on fumes." Emily initiated a series of carefully constructed inquiries, centering on the events of Sarah's last known day. Rick reiterated his account, almost word for word, from the original police report. Sunday morning was the last time he saw her. She'd left for her usual jog. When he awoke later, she was gone. He presumed she had gone to see her sister in the neighboring town. When she hadn't returned by nightfall, he alerted the authorities. "And you didn't attempt to reach her sister before contacting the police?" Emily inquired, maintaining a neutral expression. Rick's brow furrowed. I assumed she was staying overnight. I didn't want to intrude." Inconsistent. Evasive? Emily noted. The next day, Emily pored over a blurred copy of Rick Bartlett's initial statement to Sheriff Brody. The report was exhaustively detailed, brimming with mundane observations and seemingly inconsequential particulars. Yet, as she scrutinized it, certain phrases leaped out, discordant notes in a mournful composition. He'd specified that Sarah was wearing her favorite blue running shoes that morning. Yet, when asked about her attire later, he described a gray t-shirt and black leggings, omitting any mention of the footwear. A minor detail, perhaps, but Emily knew the power of minutiae. Then there was the matter of Sarah's running route. Rick asserted she always frequented the old logging road, a secluded path snaking through the woods. But Emily recalled interviewing Sarah years prior for a piece on local artists. Sarah had voiced her aversion to running alone in the woods, preferring the safety of well-lit, populated streets. Emily leaned back, a knot tightening in her stomach. The discrepancies mounted, each a subtle stroke, painting an unsettling portrait. Rick Bartlett wasn't simply grieving. He was fabricating a story, and the narrative was riddled with holes. She retrieved Sarah's file from her computer, rereading the interview. Sarah was vibrant, brimming with life, a spark of mischief in her eyes. She spoke passionately about her art, her connection to nature, her aspirations. It was impossible to reconcile that image with the persona Rick was portraying, a woman who vanished into thin air. Emily printed the police report, Sarah's interview, and her own observations from the vigil. She arrayed them across her desk, a fragmented jigsaw puzzle of truths and calculated falsehoods. The pieces refused to align. A chilling premonition settled over her. This was more than just a missing person case. It was something altogether different, something sinister, and she suspected that the truth lay concealed beneath Rick Bartlett's carefully constructed facade. She feared that Sarah Bartlett wasn't coming back. The diner waitress. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Emily navigated the quiet streets of Havenwood. Her first stop, Mrs. Abernathy, Sarah's elderly neighbor, known for her prize-winning roses and even sharper hearing. Mrs. Abernathy, perched on her porch swing, offered Emily a glass of iced tea and a hesitant smile. Sarah was a lovely girl, she croaked, her voice raspy with age. Always helping me with my groceries, pruning the roses. Rick, though, he kept himself, always seemed a bit distant. Emily pressed gently. Did you ever see Sarah with anyone else? Any friends, perhaps, besides Rick? Mrs. Abernathy squinted, thinking. Just that young man from the hardware store, helping her fix her porch railing. But nothing improper. She paused, then added with a sly wink, though Rick did seem to spend a lot of time down at Millie's Diner. Millie's Diner. Emily scribbled the name in her notepad. Another thread. The diner was a classic small-town establishment, smelling of frying bacon and stale coffee. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and a vintage jukebox hummed softly in the corner. Emily slid onto a stool at the counter and ordered a slice of apple pie. The waitress, a woman with fiery red hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and a name tag that read Brenda, sauntered over. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, narrowed slightly as she approached. "Something else, hon?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of steel. "Just wondering," Emily began casually. "I'm new in town, and I was told this is the place to get all the local gossip." Brenda leaned against the counter, her gaze unwavering. "Depends on what you want to know." "Well," Emily continued, taking a bite of pie, "I heard Sarah Bartlett used to come here a lot." Brenda's expression hardened. "Sarah? Nah, she wasn't a diner kind of girl." "Really?" Her neighbors seemed to think otherwise. Said her husband, Rick, was a regular. A flicker of something, anger, crossed Brenda's face before she quickly masked it. "Rick? Yeah, he comes in sometimes. Likes the coffee. Black, no sugar. Quiet guy." Emily persisted. "Did you know Sarah well?" Brenda wiped down the counter with unnecessary force. "Look, lady, I serve a lot of people. I don't keep tabs on their personal lives." Emily decided to switch tactics. "He seems really distraught about her disappearance." "He should be," Brenda snapped, her voice laced with venom. She was his wife. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily decided to push further. "I heard he's a bit of a charmer. Does he flirt with the waitresses?" Brenda's eyes flashed. "Get out," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I don't appreciate you coming in here, stirring up trouble." Emily held her ground. "Just asking questions." "Well, ask them somewhere else," Brenda hissed, "before you get yourself hurt." Emily paid for her pie and left, the waitress's hostile glare burning into her back. Clearly, Brenda knew more than she was letting on. The fiery redhead was hiding something, and Emily was determined to find out what. Back at her motel room, Emily looked up Brenda Flores online. A few social media profiles revealed a penchant for fast cars, tattoos, and posting cryptic quotes about loyalty and betrayal. There were also several photos of Brenda with Rick Bartlett, their body language suggesting something more than just a casual acquaintance. In one photo, taken at a local bar, Rick's arm was draped possessively around Brenda's shoulders, and she was gazing up at him with adoration. Emily stared at the photo, a knot forming in her stomach. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Rick's rehearsed grief, the inconsistencies in his story, Brenda's defensiveness. It all pointed to a tangled web of deceit. She had a feeling that Brenda's possessive nature, hinted at in her online persona, might be a key to unlocking the truth about Sarah's disappearance. A woman like that wouldn't take kindly to being played or to having her affections divided. If Rick was having an affair with Brenda, and Sarah found out, the possibilities were chilling. Emily knew she needed to tread carefully. Brenda was volatile and potentially dangerous. But the truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of lies and simmering resentment, and Emily was determined to unearth it, no matter the cost. Denials and alibis. Brenda deposited the plate of fries with a thud that shattered the diner's afternoon lull. The lunch crowd had vanished, leaving behind a ghostly aroma of spent coffee and caramelized onions. Drying her hands on her stained apron, she fought to contain the tempest brewing behind her eyes. The overhead bell jingled, heralding Sheriff Brody's arrival. His message had been cryptic, a few questions. About Sarah Bartlett, she knew with bone-deep certainty. He settled onto a stool, his features arranged in a politely neutral facade that screamed trouble. "Brenda, appreciate you making time." Arms crossed defensively, she met his gaze head-on. "You said it was urgent, Sheriff. I've got things to do." The fabrication tasted like ash. She'd been fixated on a single spot on the counter for what felt like an eternity, a desperate attempt to outrun her spiraling thoughts. "It concerns Sarah Bartlett," he stated, dispensing with pleasantries. Brenda's jaw clenched. Name doesn't ring a bell. The words felt forced, unnatural. "Rick Bartlett's wife. She's been gone a week." Brenda snorted. "Rick? Sure, I serve him coffee. That's it." Her pulse surged, a frantic tattoo against her ribs, challenging her forced calm. Emily Carter mentioned seeing the two of you chatting yesterday. Seemed friendly enough. Brody's gaze remained fixed, unwavering. So, I'm courteous to my clientele. It's called business. Snatching a rag, she attacked the already pristine counter, her motions sharp and agitated. Look, Sheriff, I know nothing about any missing woman. Rick's a regular. He orders, he pays, and that's where it ends. Did he ever mention her? Brody pressed, his tone even and probing. Brenda hesitated a beat too long. No, absolutely not. Why would he? She held his gaze, attempting to project an innocence she was far from feeling. Brody leaned in slightly. Did you ever leave the diner with him? Nausea churned in her stomach. Are you accusing me, Sheriff? Her voice edged up, sharp and brittle. Because you're barking up the wrong tree. I wouldn't hurt a soul. Just trying to piece things together, Brenda. Rick claimed he hadn't breathed a word about his wife to anyone here. Said he kept things separate. Brenda's mind raced, a chaotic scramble. Rick had been untruthful. But why? Was he shielding her? Or strategically positioning her as the fall guy? A wave of bitterness stung her tongue. He probably just didn't want to bore anyone with his domestic woes, she offered, striving for nonchalance. People don't exactly come to Millie's for a therapy session. I see, Brody replied slowly, his eyes narrowed to slits. So, you were working last Tuesday evening? The night Sarah vanished. Brenda's breath caught in her throat. Yeah, I was. And, can anyone confirm that? That you were here all night? Her mind searched frantically. Millie was here, naturally. And, yeah, old Mr. Henderson was parked at his usual spot, nursing a coffee and playing solitaire until closing. Always is. Henderson, practically deaf and half-blind, wouldn't recall the month, let alone what time she left. Millie, however, Millie missed nothing. She'd have to tread carefully. Millie and Mr. Henderson, Brody echoed, scribbling a note. Good to know. He paused, his gaze dissecting. And you stayed right here the entire evening? No leaving early for any reason. Brenda's pulse hammered in her ears, a deafening roar. That's correct. Straight through. Close up with Millie. Like we always do. Another fiction, layered upon the first. She'd slipped out early that night, all right. Met Tariq. Their confrontation had been explosive. She demanded he leave Sarah. He begged for more time. All right, Brenda. That's all for now. But I might need another word with you. Brody pushed off the stool, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Whatever, she mumbled, pivoting to feign interest in the coffee machine. He reached the door, then hesitated, turning back. Brenda, if you recall anything whatsoever, that might help us locate Sarah, please don't hesitate to call. He extended his card. She snatched it, her fingers betraying her anxiety with a telltale tremble. I told you, Sheriff, I know nothing. He offered a curt nod, his expression a blank canvas, and departed. The bell above the door chimed one last time, a mocking taunt. Brenda stared at the card clutched in her hand, her heart a caged animal thrashing wildly against its confines. She crushed it in her fist, the paper giving way beneath the pressure. She was in too deep, far deeper than she could have imagined, and she sensed, with growing dread, that this was merely the opening act. Her story was fragile, cobbled together with half-truths and the unreliable recollections of a doddering old man. She had to solidify her narrative. She had to shield herself. And Rick, even if he was deceiving her as well, she loved him. And love, she realized with a surge of bitterness, drove people to madness. The secret storage unit. Across the street, in a diner booth thick with the ghost of breakfast, Emily sipped at cooling coffee, the scent of fried bacon clinging stubbornly to her jacket. Through the expansive front window, she kept Brenda in sight, scrutiny etched on her face. The waitress navigated the familiar maze of tables, balancing laden trays, doling out refills with a practiced, almost mechanical smile. Yet, Emily had glimpsed something beneath that facade during Brody's questioning. Not just fear, but a glint of calculation. Emily wasn't a detective, true, but a journalist's instincts were just as sharp. She'd initiated her inquiry with the standard checks. Brenda Flores, address, known associates. The digital footprint was unremarkable, a bland echo of small-town normalcy. Minor traffic violations, a delinquent credit card bill. But experience had taught her that paper rarely told the whole story. For 2 days, Emily had maintained a discreet surveillance. The diner, the cramped apartment above the laundromat, the local market. Brenda's routine felt deliberately, almost theatrically, ordinary. Almost. The small, consistent ATM withdrawals, for instance, never exceeding 100, always from different machines. And the out-of-town gas station trips, each purchase conducted inside, in cash. Always cash. A pattern was emerging. Today, Emily's focus sharpened on Brenda's after-shift activities. She observed her clocking out, a visible lightening in her demeanor as she departed the diner's harsh fluorescent glow. The apron went into the hamper. A well-worn leather bag was slung across her shoulder. After a calculated pause, Emily followed in her own aging sedan, attempting to blend into the flow of afternoon traffic. Brenda's beat-up Corolla, its faded blue paint a testament to years of relentless sun, moved with a hesitant twitchiness. The subsequent route suggested an attempt to lose a pursuer, a series of seemingly random turns. Emily, however, remained a persistent shadow, relying on intuition and a practiced sense of paranoia to predict Brenda's maneuvers. At last, Brenda veered onto a gravel road, leading away from the town's pulse towards the quiet isolation of the industrial park. Emily felt a quickening of her pulse. This felt like a departure from the ordinary. This felt like something real. The road terminated at a squat, cinder-block structure identified by a sign that proclaimed Secure Storage Solutions. Brenda edged her Corolla into a parking space situated far from the entrance, avoiding the watchful gaze of security cameras. With her head bowed, a baseball cap pulled low to obscure her features, she exited the vehicle. Emily parked a block away, simulating a phone conversation as she watched Brenda's approach. Instead of using the main entrance, under constant surveillance, she skirted the building along a line of overgrown shrubbery. The waitress vanished behind its dense cover. Emily ended her feigned call and restarted her car. She idled slowly past the facility, carefully observing the perimeter. On the far side, hidden from the main thoroughfare, a break in the chain-link fence, a ragged tier obscured by more unruly vegetation. A path, faintly visible, led from this opening towards the rear of the storage units. Emily parked further down the street, where her sedan remained out of sight, and walked back towards the facility. The air was heavy, laced with the dry scent of parched grass and the acrid tang of diesel. She slipped through the opening in the fence, careful to avoid the clutching thorns. The back of the storage units presented a labyrinth of corrugated metal and corroded hardware. The silence felt heavy, laden with the unspoken weight of secrets. Emily advanced cautiously, senses heightened. Each unit appeared identical, a blank facade concealing unknown histories. She spotted Brenda near the far end of the row, wrestling with a padlock on a unit tucked discreetly into the shadows. The unit's number, scrawled in faded white paint, was barely legible. Emily retreated back to the fence, adrenaline now surging. She extracted her phone and hastily snapped a photograph of the unit, followed by another of Brenda, struggling with the lock. The images were grainy and indistinct, but they might be sufficient. Brenda finally succeeded in opening the lock, sliding the heavy door open just enough to peer inside. The interior remained shrouded in darkness, preventing Emily from discerning its contents. But she did note Brenda's hesitation, a fleeting expression of apprehension crossing her face before she disappeared within. Emily retreated, melting back into the shadows. She slipped back through the torn fence, her heart echoing in her chest. As she walked back to her car, she tapped furiously on her phone. Astra's Secure Storage Solutions, Unit 314. Brenda Flores. Cash transactions, camera shy. Concealing what? Star? The query hung in the air, a silent challenge. Emily knew one thing with certainty. Brenda Flores presented a far more intricate puzzle than her unassuming demeanor suggested. And whatever resided within that storage unit, it was worth a lie. A warrant and a freezer. The hastily scribbled note, marred by a coffee stain, screamed urgency. Storage Unit 314. Brenda Flores. Sheriff Brody massaged his temples. The ubiquitous missing person flyers featuring Sarah Bartlett's radiant smile flashing in his mind. He had to move. Now, a trip to Judge Thompson's chambers followed, an exercise in delicate persuasion. He presented the puzzle. Sarah vanished, Rick's alibi flimsy, Brenda linked to Rick, Emily Carter's covert observations, the clandestine storage unit visits. He shielded Emily, attributing the intel to a confidential informant. Thompson, his patience as threadbare as his comb-over, listened, brow deeply etched. Sheriff, circumstantial evidence and this source don't constitute bedrock. However, he sighed, the leather groaning under his weight. Bartlett's been gone 3 weeks. Time bleeds away. I'll authorize it. But Brody, bring me something solid. A jolt of adrenaline coursed through Brody. Gratitude voiced, warrant secured. He all but sprinted to his cruiser. He barked orders into the radio, summoning Deputy Miller to assemble a team and converge on Brenda Flores' residence. Brenda's home, a modest bungalow on the town's fringe, stood in stark contrast to the Bartlett estate. Peeling paint and an unkempt yard were somewhat redeemed by vibrant geraniums, splashes of crimson along the porch's edge. Brody wondered if Rick ever set foot there. His knock echoed in the afternoon hush. Moments later, Brenda appeared, her face ashen, eyes betraying a mix of surprise and dread. A faded robe clung to her frame, blonde hair, a haphazard topknot. Sheriff Brody? Her voice barely registered. What's this about? He displayed the warrant. We have reason to believe evidence connected to Sarah Bartlett's disappearance is located on this property. We need to conduct a search. Brenda's facade crumbled. Sarah? What are you talking about? I haven't seen her. Step aside, ma'am, Miller instructed, his tone firm yet polite. He and 2 deputies filed into the house, while Brody's attention shifted to the detached garage. The garage door protested as it ascended, revealing a chaotic space crammed with discarded tires, corroded tools, and teetering stacks of cardboard. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, slicing through soiled windows. Partially concealed by a tarp in the far corner sat the storage unit, the one Emily described. As Brody approached, a detail caught his eye. Pressed against the rear wall, a chest freezer, its white paint marred and discolored. A robust padlock kept the lid secured. He summoned Miller. Both coiters. Chop chop. Brenda, previously silent near the entrance, her eyes flitting about, suddenly found her tongue. No, you can't. That's personal property. Ma'am, this warrant covers the entire premises, Brody stated, his voice level. What's inside, Brenda? She remained mute, her face suffused, chest rising and falling rapidly. Miller returned, wielding the bolt cutters. A sharp snap severed the lock. Brody inhaled deeply, the air thick with the scent of dust, lubricant, and an unsettling metallic tang. He cautiously raised the lid. The freezer was packed tight with frozen provisions, mostly inexpensive meat cuts sheathed in butcher paper. But as he probed deeper, displacing bags of peas and cartons of ice cream, his fingers encountered something rigid. He extracted it, a solid block of ice, far larger than the others, swathed in duct tape. And within, visible through the icy film, was material. Dark material, Brenda gasped, a choked sound that reverberated through the confined space. She surged forward, aiming to slam the lid closed. Don't, Brody barked, seizing her arm. Miller swiftly subdued her, pulling her back. Brody plunged back into the freezer, his pulse hammering. He retrieved another block, then another, each encased in tape, each concealing fabric. A profound chill settled over him, unrelated to the temperature. He fixed Brenda with a stare, her eyes brimming with terror and defiance. What is this, Brenda? What have you done? She offered no reply, her lips sealed, her body trembling. Only the freezer's hum persisted, a monotonous, sinister drone in the oppressive silence. Brody realized, with a nauseating certainty, this was no longer a simple missing persons case. This was something far, far grimmer. The frozen truth. That freezer's nothing to do with me. Brenda screeched, her voice a fractured echo of panic. The muggy air, thick with the coppery scent of unearthed secrets, magnified her outburst. She fought Miller's hold, her gaze skittering between Brody and the white, humming box that threatened to unravel her existence. Brody ignored her tirade, his attention riveted to the chest freezer. Flaking paint revealed festering rust beneath, like a creeping rot. He sensed a glacial emanation, a frigid premonition of the horror within. Miller, secure her in the cruiser. Advise her of her rights. You can't. I swear, Sheriff, I don't know what's inside. Rick must have. Her voice faltered, a glimmer of recognition sparking in her eyes, swiftly extinguished by a renewed wave of disbelief. No, he couldn't. Miller, his expression unreadable, tightened his grip on Brenda's arm. Come on, Brenda. He steered her toward the patrol car, her wails dissolving into stifled weeping as the door thudded shut. Brody returned to the freezer. The other deputies watched him, their faces somber. Even seasoned veterans like Johnson seemed affected by the heavy atmosphere of dread. Brody cleared his throat, the sound abnormally loud in the sudden stillness. Johnson, he directed, his voice raspy. Find me something to open this thing. Carefully. Johnson nodded and vanished into the garage, reappearing moments later with a pry bar and a screwdriver. He offered them to Brody, his eyes questioning, a query Brody couldn't yet resolve. Brody knelt before the freezer, its metal surface cold and unyielding against his skin. He traced the brittle, cracked rubber of the seal with a gloved hand. Inserting the screwdriver tip into the seam, he began to lever it open, the metal screeching in protest. The air seemed to congeal around him, each breath laden with fearful anticipation. Minutes ticked by as he worked with painstaking precision to free the lid. The muscles in Brody's arms screamed with the effort, but he persisted, fueled by a grim resolve to expose the truth. Finally, with a resounding crack, the lid yielded. An Arctic gust surged out, carrying a faint, cloyingly sweet reek that twisted Brody's insides. He paused, steeling himself for the revelation he knew awaited. He inhaled deeply, then raised the lid. The scene within was far worse than his darkest imaginings. The freezer was a tomb of solid ice, its frigidity absolute. Trapped within the ice were shadowy, unidentifiable forms. But it was the face, partially visible beneath a crystalline glaze, that confirmed his worst fears. Sarah Bartlett's frozen visage gazed upward, her eyes blank and lifeless, her skin a macabre shade of blue-white. Her hair, once lustrous and vibrant, was a tangled, frozen mass plastered to her face. A delicate layer of ice sheathed her lips, a silent scream forever sealed. A collective intake of breath swept through the deputies behind him. Johnson averted his gaze, his complexion ashen. Even Miller, hardened by years on the force, remained paralyzed, his eyes wide with horror. Brody felt a surge of nausea. He fought to maintain his composure, to distance himself from the gruesome tableau, but the image of Sarah's iced face burned itself into his memory. He had clung to the faintest hope that Sarah had escaped, begun anew, anything but this. He rose slowly, his limbs leaden and unsteady. He faced his deputies, his expression bleak. This is now a homicide, he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. Secure the perimeter. Call in the state police. I want this entire property scoured, inch by inch. And someone get the medical examiner here, pronto. His gaze drifted towards the patrol car where Brenda sat, her face buried in her hands. He knew, with chilling certainty, that her world had just imploded. The falsehoods, the inconsistencies, the frantic denials, they all coalesced into one inescapable conclusion. He strode toward the car, his boots crunching on the loose gravel. He halted beside the open window, and peered down at her. She remained motionless, her body racked with silent tears. "Brenda," he said, his tone soft but firm. "We found Sarah." She recoiled, but still didn't meet his gaze. "She was in the freezer, Brenda. In your freezer." This time, she finally looked up, her eyes bloodshot and puffy, awash with dread and desperation. "I didn't," she stammered, but Brody silenced her. "Save it for your lawyer, Brenda," he said. "You're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Bartlett. Confessions and betrayal." The interrogation room's sterile light buzzed, a grating counterpoint to Brenda's weeping. Across the corridor, Rick was a study in abject misery, his face ashen. Sheriff Brody, lines of fatigue carved deep into his face, observed Brenda, his stillness a palpable pressure. He'd witnessed this tableau countless times, the deluge of tears, the staunch denials, the desperate bids for empathy. "Brenda," Brody began, his tone measured, "we located Sarah inside the freezer, in your garage." Brenda's breath hitched, another wave of anguish washing over her. I swear, Sheriff, I was unaware." The words spilled out in a torrent of frantic disavowal. Brody raised a hand, silencing her. "We need candor, Brenda. Everything. Feigning ignorance won't serve you here." He leaned in, his gaze piercing. "We are aware of your involvement with Rick. We are also aware of the discord between Rick and Sarah." Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, Detective Miller meticulously dismantled Rick's flimsy alibi. He presented the evidence, chronological inconsistencies, account from neighbors who placed his truck near Brenda's residence the night Sarah vanished. Rick squirmed, perspiration blossoming on his brow. "It was an accident," Rick finally choked out, his voice barely audible. "I swear to God, it was unintentional." Miller closed the distance, his expression unwavering. "Relate the events as they transpired, Rick." Rick's narrative unfolded in broken fragments, a stammering account. A dispute, a forceful push, Sarah's fall, her head striking the kitchen counter's edge. He never intended to harm her, he maintained. Panic seized him. He contacted Brenda. Back in her room, Brenda doggedly denied any complicity in Sarah's demise, pivoting instead to the affair. "I loved him, Sheriff. I loved him with all my heart. I would have done anything for him." Brody's face remained unreadable. "Did that anything include aiding him in concealing a corpse, Brenda?" The question lingered, thick and stifling. Brenda's eyes darted about the space, seeking an egress, a means to escape the crushing reality tightening around her. He arrived at my residence," she stuttered, her complexion paling. "He was distraught. He claimed she was no more. He wept, Sheriff. He was terrified." Across the hall, Rick was now weeping uncontrollably, his confession laid bare. He had divulged everything to Miller. How Brenda had assisted him in wrapping Sarah's body, how they had transported it to her garage under cover of darkness, the struggle to heave open the freezer. Brody pressed Brenda. "And you credited his account? That it was a mishap?" Brenda's voice fractured. "I wanted to believe him. I had to. I couldn't bear to lose him, Sheriff. I simply couldn't." He rose and approached the window, gazing out at the parking area. Reversing, he laid it out for Brenda. "He needed you. He needed an accomplice to evade justice. And your love was so consuming, you complied." The floodgates burst open. Brenda collapsed, her form convulsing with sobs. "He vowed to leave her," she cried. "He promised us a life together, a future." Brody remained impassive, permitting her grief to envelop her. He didn't perceive a heartless murderer, but rather a woman devoured by a love that had steered her down a treacherous, dark path. A path terminating in a frozen tomb. Justice in Harmony Creek. The magistrate's pronouncements echoed within the stark confines of the courtroom, each word striking like a gavel. Rick Bartlett, indicted for second-degree murder and evidence tampering. Brenda Flores, charged as an accessory after the fact. Both were denied bail. The metallic snap of handcuffs around Rick's wrists was a familiar note to Sheriff Brody, a sound marking the closure of one chapter and the ominous prelude to another, a drama destined for court transcripts and legal arguments. Brenda remained blank, her face a study in shock. Vibrant clothes exchanged for drab prison attire. Brody watched their escort, the weight of the affair heavy on his mind. Sleep had been a stranger lately. The faces of Sarah, Rick, and Brenda a constant reel in his thoughts. Sarah's strained smile from the missing person poster, Rick's feigned grief at the diner, and Brenda's faltering hope peeking through layers of deceit. 3 lives irrevocably knotted, now unraveling completely. News spread through Harmony Creek like a sudden storm. The morning coffee group at the diner murmured with disbelief. The betrayal stung deeply, exacerbated by the fact it was internal. Rick, the familiar face, the grieving widower. Brenda, always offering a quick smile and a coffee top-up. They were woven into the town's very essence, and now that tapestry was rent. Martha, known for her charitable spirit, sat wringing her hands, a tremor in her voice. "I just can't fathom it," she whispered. "Rick? Good old Rick?" And Brenda. Poor Brenda. What on earth was she thinking? The initial shock soon morphed into anger's sharper edge. Accusations surged, fueled by conjecture and rumor. Rick became a fiend, a puppeteer. Brenda, a naive pawn, blinded by affection. The boundary between compassion and condemnation blurred as the community grappled with a bitter truth. Brody understood their outrage, their bewilderment. He shared it. Yet, beneath the anger's heat, he perceived a profound sadness, an acknowledgement that even in a haven like Harmony Creek, malevolence could sprout and flourish. He found respite in the tranquility of his office, the comforting aroma of aged paper and seasoned leather a familiar anchor. Seated at his desk, he revisited the depositions, the crime scene photographs, the coroner's report. Each piece of evidence, each meticulous detail, spoke of duplicity and desperation. He mused over Brenda, caught in Rick's intricate snare. The law was unambiguous. A choice had been made. Yet he couldn't dismiss the memory of her face dissolving during her confession, the sheer anguish in her voice as she recounted her affection for Rick, a love that had charted a course of ruin. Later that week, Emily Carter approached Brody near the courthouse. The dark circles under her eyes mirrored his own, a testament to sleepless nights dedicated to hunting down facts and crafting sentences. "Sheriff," she said, her tone hushed but resolute, "I just wanted to thank you for everything." Brody nodded, acknowledging her commitment. "You did fine work, Emily. You helped unearth the truth." Emily paused, as if wrestling internally. "It's not truly over, is it? Not for Sarah's family." "No, Brody conceded. It isn't. But at least closure has arrived. They can begin to mend." Emily's articles had not only revealed the truth, but had also given Sarah a human dimension, portraying a vibrant woman whose life had been tragically stolen. This empathetic journalism drew the attention of a regional journalism awards panel. Weeks later, Emily received notification that she was to be honored with the prestigious Beacon of Truth award for her investigative series on Sarah Bartlett's vanishing. It was a bittersweet victory. While she appreciated the acknowledgement, she was haunted by the terrible price associated with it. At the award presentation, Emily dedicated the award to Sarah Bartlett and her family. "This award is not for me," she stated, her voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to Sarah, whose story demands to be heard, and to her loved ones who deserve justice and peace." Her words resonated profoundly with the attendees, serving as a reminder of the human toll of crime and the necessity of pursuing truth, irrespective of the discomfort it brings. The news of the award made its way to Harmony Creek, offering a sliver of comfort to a community still reeling from the devastation. It was a subtle reminder that even in the clutches of darkness, hope for justice and restoration persisted. Brody read about Emily's recognition in the local paper, a small smile gracing his features. It was a minor triumph, confirmation that their efforts had not been futile. He knew the trial would be protracted and taxing, that the scars in Harmony Creek would require time to heal. But he also knew that the truth had emerged, and that was paramount. He glanced out the window at the familiar panorama of Harmony Creek. The sun was descending, casting elongated shadows across the landscape. He reflected on Sarah, on Rick, on Brenda. He knew their stories would forever be etched within him, a testament to the shadows that can conceal themselves beneath the veneer of even the most picturesque communities. But he also knew that even in the darkest depths, there remained the possibility of justice, of healing, and of a new beginning. He earnestly hoped that Harmony Creek would rediscover its path to the light.